Deadly deliveries. Another round of suspicious packages target Democrat leaders. We're at the White House with a response. Diagnosing the midterms. With elections 12 days away, a look at the role healthcare is playing in a hotly contested Senate race in Arizona. Synod on youth. We catch up with a cardinal from Pakistan who updates us on what life is like for Christians in his country. And impressive feat. A church leader from the Philippines takes a step in the right direction with the younger generation. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, October 25th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A manhunt is intensifying for a serial bomber suspected of sending devices to prominent Democrats. 3 more suspicious packages were discovered today, bringing the number to 10. The FBI is confirming packages addressed to former Vice President Joe Biden and actor Robert De Niro are similar in appearance to those used to send bombs to other Democrats. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. These bomb scares expose deep political divisions in the U.S. and continue to cause partisan finger-pointing. President Trump blames mainstream media for stirring anger within society, and he has been very critical of Democrats. But today, the White House press secretary said it's not fair to link the president to attempted violence.
There's a big difference between comments made and actions taken. The president is certainly not responsible for sending suspicious packages to someone, no more than Bernie Sanders was responsible for a supporter of his shooting up a Republican baseball field practice last year. The idea that this is at the hands of the president is absolutely ridiculous.
Sarah Sanders says everyone has a role to play to condemn violence, including the media.
We're going to find out what the latest is here at CNN. We're going to be right back.
She singled out CNN, where one of the suspicious packages forced employees to evacuate their New York City offices.
Yesterday, the very first thing that the president did was come out and condemn the violence. The very first thing your network did was come out and accuse the president of being responsible for it. That is not okay.
Sanders referring to a statement issued by CNN President Jeff Zucker, who wrote, "There's a total and complete lack of understanding at the White House about the seriousness of their continued attacks on the media."
The media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories.
President Trump speaking at a rally last night in Wisconsin. And Hillary Clinton, campaigning for Democrats in Florida yesterday, said she's grateful to the Secret Service for intercepting a suspicious package addressed to her. She says voters need to elect people who will unite the country.
It is a troubling time, isn't it? And it's a time of deep divisions.
Investigators are now trying to determine if the packages were intended to detonate or if they were sent as a scare tactic. Some law enforcement officials are sharing the devices were not rigged like traditional package bombs that would explode upon opening. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. And our exclusive EWTN News Nightly poll finds that in the West, health care is the #1 most important issues for Catholics. In Arizona, the topic of pre-existing conditions is heating up as one of the country's closest races is underway. It's a race that could determine which party controls the U.S. Senate. Correspondent Jason Calvi reports from Tempe, Arizona. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The Obamacare debate is back after Senator John McCain famously voted no on its replacement back in 2017. Now Democratic candidate Kyrsten Sinema is blaming her opponent for trying to take away protections for those with pre-existing conditions. But Republican Martha McSally says that's a lie.
Obamacare right now is failing people who have pre-existing conditions.
But Democrats attack Republican Martha McSally over her vote to replace Obamacare. That law does offer protections for people with pre-existing conditions.
Martha McSally voted to allow insurance companies to deny coverage to people like our son.
The Democrats have nothing to run on right now, right? So they're going back to their regular playbook of fear tactics.
So the former fighter jet pilot shoots back. inside this Jewish synagogue in Scottsdale, in a state Donald Trump won by 3.5 points.
People with pre-existing conditions cannot be denied coverage, that they are not going to be turned away, right? And so we've got to make sure that we cover that. But there's better ways to do this than Obamacare. Obamacare is federal, one-size-fits-all, $1 trillion of taxes.
While Democrat Kyrsten Sinema promises to fight the GOP on health care.
It's why Kyrsten Sinema voted to stop a new age tax on health care for Arizonans aged 50 and over and protect coverage for 2.8 million Arizonans with pre-existing conditions.
12 more days of ads. That's when polls close. Voters in this swing state, bombarded by ads, already are casting ballots.
There's too much on both sides to understand. There's just so many nasty comments, I don't know what to believe.
But McSally says she believes.
But I was propelled by the grace of God on a path of service, a path of doing something meaningful with my life, of looking every day as if it is a gift.
An Arizona Republican insider tells me he was very worried about McSally's chances of winning this race until he says something very important happened. The controversy over the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, he says, propelled this former Air Force fighter jet pilot, propelled her campaign, and now the Cook Political Report says this race is a toss-up. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. The U.S. bishops will meet in January for a week-long retreat, the mission to reflect on the current situation facing the church. Pope Francis first suggested the retreat, which will take place outside of Chicago. The retreat comes as officials in Alaska and Virginia announce investigations into clergy sex abuse. This brings the total of probes by attorneys general to 14. The Archbishop of Anchorage has ordered a review of misconduct going back 5 decades. In Virginia, the leaders of Arlington and Richmond dioceses welcome the probe. In a joint statement, Bishops Michael Burbidge and Barry Nestout write in part, any instance of child sexual abuse is intolerable and gravely immoral, and we hope this process will bring healing for all victims and confirm our commitment to accountability and justice. The Diocese of Wheeling, Charleston in West Virginia says it plans to release the names of all priests and deacons credibly accused of child abuse. Last month, Pope Francis accepted the resignation of the bishop of the diocese, Michael Bransfield. Saudi Arabia again changes its story about the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Officials now say evidence shows the murder was premeditated. This contradicts an assertion just days ago saying rogue officials killed the writer by mistake. Khashoggi vanished earlier this month after entering the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul. He was a longtime critic of the Saudi crown prince. The ambassador at large for international religious freedom says protecting religious liberty around the world remains a top priority for the Trump administration. Sam Brownback is marking a milestone for advocates this week. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has the details from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Ambassador Brownback says advocating for international religious freedom is his most important life's work. It's why he's celebrating a law passed 20 years ago, which made it a priority for the United States to work on behalf of people around the world who are persecuted because of their religious beliefs. 2 decades later, he says there's still a long way to go.
We believe there needs to be more religious freedom in the world. Unfortunately, 80% of the world's population lives in some sort of religiously restricted environment. And we don't think that's appropriate. We don't think that's good.
Ambassador Sam Brownback today vowing the Trump administration will continue to push for religious freedom for all people. It comes as the department marks the anniversary of the International Religious Freedom Act, a bipartisan bill signed by President Bill Clinton in 1998. Today, Brownback highlighted several key parts of the world: Iraq, Ukraine, and China. On Iraq, he's thankful to all those who advocate for Christians and other minorities. Today, a Yazidi woman spoke in Paris about bringing justice to those who commit crimes against the most vulnerable. Nadia Murad, co-winner of this year's Nobel Peace Prize, was among the thousands of Yazidi women and girls who were kidnapped and enslaved by ISIS in 2014. Meanwhile, on Ukraine, Brownback says the United States supports an independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Kiev has been under the Russian Orthodox jurisdiction since the 1600s. Despite fears of violence, the ambassador says believers should be able to worship without fear of outside interference. Finally, on China, Brownback called out the communist government for a crackdown on worshipers, including Buddhists and Christians.
We, as the United States, believe this is wrong. That's why we've made them a country of particular concern for some period of time now, but also call on them to allow people to practice their religious freedom.
That is the same message he has to countries around the world. This week, investigators at the United Nations are also highlighting another problem area, Myanmar. They say the military there is still carrying out a genocide against the minority Rohingya Muslims, hundreds of thousands of which have had to flee the country. Lauren.
Correspondent White Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Police scuffle with Coptic priests outside of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The clergy were protesting the start of restoration work by the Israeli Antiquities Authority. The repairs came after a stone fell out of place in the side chapel of St. Michael the Archangel. The church is built on the site where Jesus died, was buried, and rose from the dead. Cardinals, bishops, and young Catholics took a break from the Synod on Youth today, took time to pray together.
Undoubtedly starts from a personal call.
About 300 people joined in a 3-hour pilgrimage, and it was followed by a visit to the tomb of St. Peter and a Mass with the Holy Father. Among the pilgrims this morning was Cardinal Joseph Coots from Karachi, Pakistan. He joins us from Rome. Your Eminence, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
More than 95% of the population in your country is Muslim, less than 2% Christian, and with the majority of those are Catholic. What's your experience, and how do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, that's not something that can be just said in a few words. We all live together. We belong to the same country. We speak the same language. We have the same culture. So it's not that the Christians live separately in many places. There are certain areas, especially in the rural areas, where the Christian live separately. There are a few villages even that are majority Christian. But in the big cities, we all just live mixed. Let's put it this way. If you take another view of how society is in Pakistan, the church, the Catholic Church, as well as the Protestant churches, we are doing a lot of service to the country, mainly through education. We have many very good schools in the country. We have many hospitals and smaller clinics. We have a lot of charitable work among the drug addicts, work among the handicapped children, work among the needy of various kinds. And during times of disaster, natural disasters, and Pakistan is a disaster-prone country. Floods, recently we've had earthquakes, now we're having drought in a certain part of the country in the south. Caritas, which is an international organization, Catholic organization, we have Caritas Pakistan, and we are always in the forefront for such activities. In fact, I think we contribute a lot to the development of the country as a whole.
Pope Francis announced yesterday that this year's financial support from the Aid to the Church in Need is going to be donated to Christians in Pakistan. How will this money help those practicing their faith in your country?
One of the big needs is to keep up the quality and the standard of our educational institutions and our hospitals, for example, the medical work. We need a lot of financial help to maintain such institutions like hospitals and small clinics and other work that we are doing. Because the government does not directly help us. We do occasionally. There is a fund for religious minorities which can be used, but to keep these institutions going as they were before, when we had far more foreign missionaries working in the country, now to pay paid professionals is far more expensive. So there are many ways in a poor country where any financial help can be put to very good use.
You were made a cardinal in June of this year, and you're 4 months into that job. How has that changed what you do? What is your greatest accomplishment so far?
My greatest accomplishment in 4 months? Well, I don't think I've accomplished anything except trying to cope with what it means to be a cardinal and what more is going to happen.
Good point.
Like being called to the synod, for example. Yes.
Good point. Well, we wish you much luck, Cardinal Joseph Coots, Archbishop of Karachi, Pakistan. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. God bless you all.
Also in Rome, recognize this guy talking the Pope's ear off right there. It's EWTN senior contributor Matthew Bunson and his wife Bonnie. They're shaking hands and receiving a blessing from Pope Francis after the Holy Father's weekly meeting with pilgrims. But also notice how Dr. Bunson shrewdly presented the Pope with a copy of his new book on Saint Pope Paul VI. Coming up, analysis on the president's response to the suspicious packages being mailed to Democrat leaders, and why a Catholic group in the nation's capital had reason to celebrate last night. With less than 2 weeks to the midterm elections, the package bombs sent to prominent Democrats and CNN appear to be the latest example of how extreme and divided the political climate in this country has become. Joining me now is John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax. You have been in this business, John, for a very long time. How long have you covered Washington?
Decades.
Decades.
Exact 39 years.
So, is this the most heated you've ever seen the political rhetoric or not?
I'd have to say that the period before Ronald Reagan's election, with Americans held hostage in Iran and inflation and unemployment in double digits, was pretty heated, but it never was as personalized as the rhetoric is today.
Let's talk about this tweet from President Trump this morning. A very big part of the anger, he said, we see today in our society is caused by the purposely false and inaccurate reporting of the mainstream media that I refer to as fake news. It has gotten so bad and hateful that it is beyond description. Mainstream media must clean up its act fast. What influence does the relationship between the president and the press have on political discourse?
Well, when there is constant disagreement and there is constant rancor, the rhetoric becomes very incendiary, and it not only is upsetting to people, it distracts from serious discourse on issues. I gave a talk on this, by the way, at Millersville University in Pennsylvania, and I pointed out that there has to be some kind of pilot project in media and with politicians to bring back civil discourse in journalism in general. And we had a lot of questions and quite a discussion on it. I would simply say that at this particular time, it's not healthy to keep inveighing about the media, particularly after what happened to Mr. Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey. And I would just suggest to the president, someone he knew who predicted his election, he might follow his advice. Richard Nixon, elected president 50 years ago in this November 5th, once said, when the action gets hot, keep the rhetoric cool.
John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
A big night last night for the Catholic Information Center. The Washington, D.C. based group is here right on K Street helping people to keep the faith. And I was honored to have been the Master of Ceremonies at its 7th annual John Paul II Award for New Evangelization. Being a Catholic is about service, and that's what Catholic Information Center does. The gala was held before a sold-out crowd at the Mayflower Hotel. Philanthropist Sean Filer won that award. He is chairman of the Chiaroscuro Foundation and president of Equinox Partners. He's also championed human dignity and promoted the church's evangelical mission. The CIC and its leader, Father Charles Trujillos, calls itself the soul of Washington in the heart of the city, and I was grateful to be there. Thank you. Up next, analysis on an administration move that would affect the transgender community. And a cardinal from the Philippines joins the dance. court in San Salvador has issued an arrest warrant for the man suspected of killing St. Oscar Romero in 1980. The suspect is a 78-year-old former Army officer, and charges against the man were dismissed in 1993. Oscar Romero, who was canonized this month by Pope Francis, was killed while celebrating Mass. A report earlier this week said the Trump administration is considering a new definition of gender. The New York Times says the Department of Health and Human Services is circulating a memo proposing gender be defined as, quote, an immutable biological condition determined by a person's sex organs at birth. It effectively would scrap Obama-era guidelines encouraging school officials to let transgender students use bathrooms that match how they self-identify. And joining me now by Skype from the Heritage Foundation is Senior Research Fellow Ryan Anderson. Ryan's also the author of the book, When Harry Became Sally. Ryan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be with you.
In your book, you say that there is a gulf between the media's sunny depiction of gender fluidity and the often sad reality of living with gender dysphoria. And you say you have a compassionate strategy for pushing back against what you call misguided policies. What is it?
Sure. I mean, the gulf between the media's sunny depiction of this and the sad realities is that many people experience profound suffering with gender dysphoria. They feel alienated from their own bodies. And we should take that seriously. People aren't faking this. They're not just pretending to be transgender. They really do feel discomfort with their own bodies. But the problem isn't with their body. And so the solution isn't with cross-sex hormones or with puberty-blocking drugs or with sex reassignment surgery. Many of the most tragic stories involve people who transitioned as teenagers and then 5, 10, 15 years later detransitioned because transitioning didn't bring them that wholeness and happiness. So we need to explore what the underlying cause is of that dysphoria. What's the underlying cause or the underlying reason for someone not feeling comfortable in their own bodies?
Oh, okay, well then let's bring this back into the public sector here. LGBT rights leaders say that the Trump administration's proposal to redefine gender is the latest attack on transgender Americans, and they're responding with a big social media campaign, #Won'tBeErased. What's your response to their contention that these proposed definitions of sex and gender, whether or not dysphoria is part of it, could be used to discriminate against them at work, at school, or even at the doctor's office?
It's the exact opposite. It was the Obama administration in the very last months of their term in office. They redefined a 40-year-old law. They redefined a word in a 40-year-old law, and the word was sex. And the law says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And the Obama administration redefined that to mean gender identity. And then in May of 2016, they sent a letter to all of the nation's schools saying that you don't have to do bathrooms and locker rooms according to gender identity instead of biological sex. They issued a mandate saying all healthcare plans would have to cover sex reassignment procedures. All relevant physicians would have to perform them. All the Trump administration is doing is saying, no, the word sex means sex. It means the biological, physiological, anatomical reality. And we're not going to be changing the nation's bathroom policies. We're not going to be coercing doctors or mandating healthcare. We're going to leave this to individual communities, to individual doctors, individual schools to find solutions that work for everyone.
Voters in Massachusetts are going to have the opportunity this November to keep or repeal a 2016 law allowing transgender individuals to use the bathrooms they feel match their identity. Based on what we've seen happening, do you think that we will see more of these ballot initiatives in other states?
Insofar as more jurisdictions move away from sensible bathroom policies to allowing boys who identify as girls into the girls' bathroom, we're going to see more responses like this from citizens. It was just earlier this month that the Department of Education announced that they were looking into a Georgia school where a 5-year-old girl was assaulted by a male classmate who identified as gender fluid and who was inside her bathroom. And so I think as we see more examples of cases like that, parents are going to be worried about what sort of policy their school's implementing, and therefore voters are going to have this concern at the ballot box.
Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and author of the book, When Harry Became Sally. Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, the Vatican Synod on Youth provides proof that at least one Catholic leader is not out of step with the younger generation.
Is that okay? Can we do it this way? Huh?
That's Cardinal Tagle, Luis Antonio Tagle of Manila. We've spoken to hear him with him on this program. He's 61. He says the young people have taught him and other church leaders, quote, valuable lessons about humanity and following Jesus. Looks like he is teaching them a dance move or two. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. You can follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.